My name is Zoe Patterson, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered that sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away with everything they need. The taxi engine cut off in front of what used to be home, and through the windshield, I saw it all. Black garbage bags scattered across the lawn like wounded soldiers, some split open with my clothes spilling onto the grass. A piece of notebook paper, soggy from morning dew, was taped to one bag, even from here. I could make out the words scrawled in my brother's handwriting. If you still want to stay, move to the basement. I sat there for a moment, letting the rage wash over me before it cooled into something harder, sharper. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd finally put me in my place. But what they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this day for months. Hell, maybe I'd been preparing for it since the day I moved back into this house 2 years ago. The driver cleared his throat. "Ma'am, this is the address." "Right." "Yes," I said, pulling out my phone. "But we're going somewhere else. Give me a minute." My fingers moved across the screen with practiced ease. First, a text to the moving company I'd put on standby. Then a call to my real estate agent. Finally, a message to my boss at Artemis Tech Works, letting him know I'd be working from my new home office starting Monday. Each action felt like cutting a rope that had been slowly strangling me. 2 years. That's how long I'd let them drain me dry. 2 years since that phone call that changed everything. I'd been happy in my downtown apartment. At 29, I was making good money as a software developer, enjoyed my freedom, and had built a life that was entirely my own. Friday nights were for wine and coding side projects. Saturdays were for hiking or catching up with friends. Sundays were sacred just me, my coffee, and whatever book I was devouring that week. Then Mom called. "Your father's had an accident," she'd said, her voice thick with tears. "The doctors say he can't go back to delivery driving. His back? It's bad, Zoe. Really bad." The story tumbled out in pieces. Dad's workers' comp would barely cover the medical bills. Mom's job at the corner store paid minimum wage. They were 3 months behind on the mortgage. The house our childhood home was facing foreclosure. "We wouldn't ask if we had any other choice," Mom had whispered. But Brian's between jobs, and with the kids. Of course Brian was between jobs. My older brother had been between jobs for the better part of a decade, always with a new excuse, a new scheme that would definitely work this time. But he had kids, and that seemed to excuse everything in our family's eyes. "Just until we get back on our feet," Dad had said when he got on the line, his voice rough with pain medication. "You're the only one who can help us, sweetheart. You've always been the responsible one." The responsible one. The words had echoed in my head as I'd looked around my perfect apartment, at the life I'd built brick by brick, and like an idiot, I'd said yes. The plan had seemed simple enough. I'd move back home, use my rent money to help with the mortgage, and keep the family afloat until Dad recovered and Brian found work. 6 months, maybe a year at most. I could handle that. I gave notice on my apartment, packed up my life, and moved back into my childhood bedroom. The same faded butterfly wallpaper, the same creaky floorboard by the window, the same view of the old oak tree I used to climb when Brian and his friends would torment me. The first few weeks weren't terrible. I set up my home office in the spare bedroom, establishing boundaries from day one. I worked regular hours, contributed to groceries, and covered the mortgage payment. Mom cooked dinner, Dad rested, and Brian supposedly job hunted. We fell into a rhythm that almost felt sustainable. Then Brian's temporary situation imploded. "Just for a few weeks," he'd said, standing on the porch with 2 suitcases and his wife Clara beside him. Their boys, 8-year-old Mason and 6-year-old Jaden, were already racing around the yard. "Clara's parents are being unreasonable about us staying there, and the apartment fell through." I'd looked at Clara, with her designer handbag and fresh manicure, and wondered how they could afford those things when they couldn't afford rent. But I'd bitten my tongue. A few weeks. I could manage a few weeks. Those few weeks stretched into months. Brian's job search consisted of scrolling through his phone while sprawled on the couch. Clara treated the house like a hotel, leaving messes for Mom to clean up while she went to networking lunches with her girlfriends. The boys ran wild, their parents too absorbed in their phones to notice or care, and somehow, everything became my responsibility. Zoe, the internet's slow. Can you call the company? Zoe, we're out of milk again. Zoe, the mortgage payment is due tomorrow. Zoe, the boys need new shoes for school. Always. Zoe. Always me. The responsible one. The one with the steady job and no kids. Which apparently meant I had nothing but money and time to spare. I started working longer hours, partly to earn more, but mostly to avoid the chaos downstairs. My home office became my sanctuary, the only space in the house that still felt like mine. I installed a lock after catching Mason rifling through my work papers, looking for blank paper to draw on. You're being selfish, Clara had sniffed when she saw the lock. They're just children. This is their home too. Their home. Not mine. Not anymore. The resentment built slowly, like water behind a dam. Every dinner where Clara made snide comments about my appearance. Every morning when I found my yogurt gone because the boys had wanted it. Every evening when Brian would lounge in the living room while I paid bill after bill after bill. Must be nice, he'd say, watching me work on my laptop. Getting paid to sit at a computer all day. Some of us have to do real work. Real work. Like he'd know anything about that. But I endured it. For Mom, who looked so tired all the time. For Dad, who tried to help despite the pain that never quite went away. For the family that had raised me, even if they'd forgotten I was a person and not just a paycheck. The breaking point came 6 months ago. I'd just received news of a promotion and a significant raise. My manager at Artemis had been impressed with my work on the Morrison Industries project, and they wanted me to lead the new development team. It meant more responsibility, but also a salary bump that would finally let me start saving again. I'd made the mistake of sharing the news at dinner. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Mom had said, but her smile was strained. This will help so much with the bills. Actually, I'd said carefully, I was thinking of starting a savings account, maybe looking at investment options. The silence was deafening. Investment options. Brian had laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. What do you need investments for? You live at home, rent-free. I pay the mortgage, I reminded him. We all contribute, Clara interjected, which was rich considering neither she nor Brian had contributed a cent since moving in. The point is, Dad said, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Family helps family. That's what we do. I have been helping, I said, feeling my temper fray. For 2 years, I've done nothing but help. When do I get to think about my future? Your future. Clara's voice dripped with false sympathy. Honey, you're 31, single, and living with your parents. What future are you planning for exactly? The words hit like a slap. I looked around the table, waiting for anyone to come to my defense. Mom studied her plate. Dad rubbed his back. Brian smirked. Besides, Clara continued, it's not like you have anyone else to spend money on. No boyfriend, no kids. What else would you do with it? That night, I lay in my childhood bed and made a decision. They wanted my money. Fine. They'd get exactly what they thought they deserved. But I'd be damned if they'd get everything. The next day, I opened a separate bank account at a different bank. I set up my direct deposit to split enough to cover the bills went to my regular account, while the rest, including my raise and bonuses, went to the new one. I told no one. I also started researching real estate. My friend Melanie worked as a realtor, and she'd been after me for years to stop throwing money away on rent and buy something. I'd always laughed it off, but now the idea had merit, a backup plan, an escape route. We looked at properties in secret, always during my lunch breaks or when I was supposedly working late. I fell in love with a small condo on the east side of town, nothing fancy. But it had good bones, plenty of light, and most importantly, it was mine. Or it would be, once I saved enough for the down payment. The lies came easily after that. When I worked late, I was really at the condo, painting walls and planning furniture placement. When I went on business trips, I was moving my important documents and valuables, bit by bit, to my new safe haven. When Clara noticed I'd stopped buying new clothes or going out, I shrugged and said I was trying to be more frugal. She'd praised me for finally being practical, never knowing I was squirreling away every penny for my freedom. The Morrison Industries project wrapped up last month with a spectacular success. The bonus was substantial, nearly $70,000. More than enough to close on the condo and furnish it exactly how I wanted. I signed the papers the day before my latest business trip. 2-bedroom, move-in ready, Melanie had said, handing over the keys. You sure you don't want to tell your family this is huge, Zoe? Soon, I'd promised. I just need the right moment. The right moment, I'd thought, would be calm, civilized. I'd sit them down, explain that it was time for me to move on, that I'd continue helping with bills for a few months while they adjusted. I'd foolishly believed we could handle this like adults. But they'd made the choice for me. The driver was looking at me in the rearview mirror, concern creasing his features. I realized I'd been sitting there, lost in memory, for several minutes. Change of plans, I said, giving him my new address. And I'll need you to wait while I grab a few things. I paid him extra to help me load the garbage bags into his trunk. Each bag was surprisingly light. They'd clearly gone through my belongings and kept anything of value. My jewelry box was missing, my laptop bag nowhere to be found. Even my grandmother's quilt, hand-stitched and irreplaceable, was gone. But they'd left the important things, too stupid or careless to realize what they were throwing away. My backup drives with all my work, my file folder of important documents, the box of photos from college they'd always mocked me for keeping. As we loaded the last bag, Mrs. Henderson from next door came out to water her roses. Zoe, what's happening, dear? I straightened up, brushing dirt off my hands. Spring cleaning, Mrs. H. Family decided I needed a fresh start. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. Mrs. Henderson had lived next door for 40 years. She'd seen us grow up, knew our family dynamics better than we did ourselves. About time, she said quietly. You're too good for how they treat you, sweetheart. Always have been. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt in days. Thank you. That means more than you know. Back in the taxi, I pulled out my phone and got to work. First, a call to the utility companies, gas, electric, water, internet, all in my name, all getting shut off effective immediately. Then the mortgage company, informing them that I would no longer be making payments on the account. The insurance companies were next, followed by the credit cards I'd foolishly let Brian add as an authorized user. Each call felt like removing a leech. By the time we reached my condo, I'd severed every financial tie that bound me to that house. My phone started ringing before I even got the first bag inside. Mom. I let it go to voicemail, then Dad, then Brian, then numbers I didn't recognize, probably Clara borrowing phones when I didn't answer hers. I turned the phone off and got to work. The condo was already partially furnished with the essentials I'd been moving in gradually. Now I added the salvaged remains of my old life, sorting through bags to see what they'd deigned to throw away. Most of my clothes were there, wrinkled but salvageable. Books they'd never understood the value of. The ceramic mug my best friend had made me in college. Small treasures they'd overlooked in their haste to punish me. It took 3 hours to unpack and settle in. 3 hours to fully transition from the old Zoe to the new one. When I finally turned my phone back on, I had 47 missed calls and twice as many texts. The voicemail started reasonable enough. Mom confused about why the internet wasn't working. Dad wondering if I'd forgotten to pay the electric bill. But as the hours had passed and the reality set in, the tone shifted. Brian's messages were the most colorful. Threats and profanity mixed with demands that I stop being a selfish bitch and fix this. Clara's were manipulation masked as concern. Was I having a breakdown? Did I need help? They were worried about me. The last message was from Mom, tears thick in her voice. The mortgage company called. They said you're not on the account anymore. Zoe, please. We'll lose the house. How could you do this to us? How could I do this to them? The irony was almost funny. I typed out a single response to the group chat Brian had created. You threw me out. I simply obliged. The basement is all yours now. Then I blocked every single one of them. The first week in my new home was paradise. I woke up when I wanted, not when Mason and Jaden decided to use the hallway as a racetrack. I ate breakfast in peaceful silence, my yogurt untouched in my own fridge. I worked from my home office, my real one, with its properly functioning internet and a door that locked from the inside. My productivity soared. Without the constant interruptions and drama, I threw myself into my work with renewed passion. My team at Artemis noticed the change immediately. Whatever you're doing differently, keep it up, my manager said during our one-on-one. You're on fire lately. If only he knew that all it took was removing the vampires who'd been draining my life force for 2 years. The attempts to contact me continued for another week. New numbers I didn't recognize. Emails to my work address. Even a message through LinkedIn from Brian. Of all things, I documented everything but didn't respond. They'd made their choice when they'd thrown my belongings on the lawn. This was simply the consequence. Then came the escalation. I was returning from my Saturday morning run, another luxury I'd missed when I saw him. Brian, leaning against his beat-up Honda in my building's visitor parking. He looked terrible. Unshaven, clothes wrinkled. The cockiness I'd always associated with him replaced by something desperate. We need to talk, he said as I approached. No, we don't. I kept walking. Zoe, please. He followed me to the building entrance. You don't understand what you've done. We're going to lose everything. I stopped, turning to face him. You mean you're going to lose everything? I lost everything 2 years ago when I gave up my life to support yours. Now we're even. Even. His face flushed red. You think this is about keeping score? Mom's having panic attacks? Dad can't sleep because his back pain is worse from the stress. The boys? The boys have 2 parents, I interrupted. Neither of whom is me. Figure it out, Brian. You're 34 years old. It's time you learned how to take care of your own family. You selfish. He stepped forward, and I saw Mrs. Chen from 2B watching from the lobby, phone in hand. I'd be very careful about your next move, I said quietly. This building has excellent security, and I have no problem getting a restraining order. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured balloon. We're family, he said, the words almost a whine. Family's supposed to stick together. Family isn't supposed to throw your belongings on the lawn because you won't give them your promotion money, I countered. Family isn't supposed to treat you like an ATM. Family isn't supposed to insult you at every meal and then expect you to pay for dessert. Clara didn't mean. Clara meant every word. You all did. The only difference is, she was honest about it. I left him standing there and went inside. Mrs. Chen gave me a subtle thumbs up as I passed. 2 days later, the real assault began. They must have pooled their resources for gas money because the whole contingent showed up. I watched from my window as they piled out of Mom's ancient minivan, Mom, Dad moving stiffly, Brian and Clara, even the boys. They looked like refugees from a disaster, which I supposed they were. A disaster of their own making. The buzzer rang and rang and rang. I know you're up there. Brian's voice crackled through the intercom. Your car's in the garage. I said nothing. Please, sweetheart. Mom's voice now, carefully modulated to hit just the right note of maternal suffering. We just want to talk. We're worried about you. Still nothing from me. Zoe, this is ridiculous, Clara chimed in. Whatever issues you think you have with us, we can work them out. But this vindictive behavior has to stop. Vindictive? That was rich. The buzzing continued for 20 minutes before building security finally intervened. I watched from my window as a uniformed guard escorted them back to the van. Clara was gesticulating wildly. Brian looked ready to punch something, and Mom was crying into Dad's shoulder. The boys, I noticed, were the only ones who seemed unbothered. They'd found a stick and were sword fighting in the parking lot. oblivious to the drama. At least someone was having a good day. That night, I ordered Thai food from my favorite restaurant, the one Clara had always said was too spicy and ethnic for family dinners. I ate pad thai in my underwear while watching the sunset from my balcony. Below, the city hummed with life, and I felt like I was finally part of it again. My phone, now filtered through an app that sent unknown numbers straight to a spam folder, stayed blissfully quiet. Work emails came through. Friends texted about weekend plans. But the constant barrage of family guilt had been silenced. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that they accepted the new reality and moved on. But if there's one thing my family excelled at, it was doubling down on bad decisions. The next phase involved flying monkeys' relatives and family friends recruited to plead their case. My Aunt Sharon called from Phoenix, devastated to hear about the family emergency. My cousin Luis texted that he couldn't believe I'd abandoned them in their time of need. Even my high school English teacher reached out on Facebook, concerned about the cry for help my mother had described. To each, I responded with a simple truth. I moved out after being kicked out. Any financial consequences are the result of their choices, not mine. Most backed off after that. The ones who didn't got blocked too. 3 weeks into my new life, I received an email that made me laugh out loud. It was from a lawyer, or rather, someone pretending to be a lawyer. The letterhead was clearly made in Microsoft Word. The language was full of legal-sounding gibberish, and the signature was digitally pasted. They were threatening to sue me for financial abandonment and breach of familial contract. I forwarded it to my actual lawyer, who confirmed it was nonsense and probably constituted fraud if they'd actually sent it to anyone else. I kept it, though, printed and framed in my home office, a reminder of just how far they'd go to avoid taking responsibility. The real kicker came a month later. I was deep in code review when my personal phone rang. The number was local, but unfamiliar. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Miss Patterson, this is James Holbrook from Pinnacle Real Estate. I understand you're interested in selling your condo." I sat up straight. "I'm sorry. What?" "Your brother Brian contacted us about listing your property. He said you were looking to downsize and move back home, that you'd asked him to handle the initial inquiries." The audacity took my breath away. "Mr. Holbrook, I'm not sure what my brother told you, but I have no intention of selling. In fact, I just bought this place. And Brian has no legal authority to make any decisions regarding my property." There was a pause. "I see. Well, this is awkward." He was quite convincing, had details about the property and everything. Details he got from stalking my social media before I blocked him. "No doubt. I apologize for wasting your time, Mr. Holbrook. And if Brian contacts you again, please let him know that any further attempts to interfere with my property will be met with legal action. Of course, and Miss Patterson, between you and me, you might want to check your credit reports, if he's bold enough to try this." The suggestion sent cold fear through me. I thanked him and immediately pulled up my credit monitoring apps. Sure enough, there had been 3 recent attempts to open credit cards in my name. All declined, thanks to the freeze I'd put on my credit after moving out. But the attempts were there. That crossed a line. I spent the rest of the day documenting everything. The fake lawyer letter, the attempted real estate fraud, the identity theft attempts. My actual lawyer was very interested, especially when I mentioned the boys living in that environment. "This goes beyond family drama," she said. "This is criminal behavior. You need to file a police report." So I did. The detective who took my statement was professional, but clearly skeptical until I showed him the evidence. The fake legal documents. The recorded voicemails that had grown increasingly threatening. The paper trail of financial abuse going back 2 years. "We see this more than you'd think," he said finally. "Family members who feel entitled to support, then escalate when it's withdrawn. The real estate thing is new, though. That takes some balls." I laughed despite myself. That's Brian. Always swinging for the fences, even when he doesn't own a bat. The restraining orders were filed that week. Temporary at first, but given the evidence, My lawyer was confident they'd be made permanent. The identity theft charges were harder to prove, but the attempts were documented, adding to the pattern of harassment. Meanwhile, life in my condo continued to improve. I painted the second bedroom a soft lavender, turning it into a combination guest room and library. I adopted a cat from the local shelter, a cranky old tabby named Ferdinand, who liked to sit on my keyboard while I worked. I hosted dinner parties for friends who'd barely seen me during my 2 years in family jail. "You look different," my friend Kai said during one such dinner. "Younger, somehow." "That's what happens when you stop carrying dead weight," I replied, refilling his wine glass. The group nodded knowingly. They'd watched my decline over the past 2 years, tried to warn me about the toll it was taking. But sometimes you have to learn the hard way that setting yourself on fire to keep others warm only leaves you in ashes. Work continued to go well. The new development team I led was crushing every deadline, and there were whispers of another promotion in the pipeline. I'd also started taking on freelance projects, building up a client base for the consulting firm I'd always dreamed of starting. Money was tight, the condo payments took most of my salary, and establishing a new household wasn't cheap. But for the first time in years, every dollar I earned was mine to allocate. No more mysterious charges on credit cards I'd stupidly shared. No more grocery runs that somehow cost $300 because Clara needed organic everything for the boys. No more emergency loans to Brian that we both knew would never be repaid. I was building something real, something lasting, something entirely mine. The court date for the permanent restraining orders came up on a Tuesday. I dressed carefully, professional, but not flashy. The kind of outfit that said responsible adult without screaming, trying too hard. They all showed up, of course. The whole sad parade, with Clara in a dress I'd never seen before. New, while claiming poverty, and the boys in their school uniforms. Brian had managed to find a suit somewhere, though it didn't quite fit. Mom and Dad looked older than I remembered, aged by 3 months of having to handle their own affairs. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and for a moment, I felt the pull of old patterns, the guilt, the obligation, the voice in my head that whispered about family and duty and being the responsible one. Then Clara whispered something to Brian, gesturing at me, and the spell broke. They hadn't changed. They'd just lost their favorite resource. The hearing was straightforward. My lawyer presented the evidence of harassment, the attempted fraud, the identity theft. Their lawyer, a public defender who looked overwhelmed, tried to paint it as a family dispute that had gotten out of hand. "My clients are simply trying to reunite their family," he said. "Miss Patterson's sudden departure left them in dire financial straits. They're facing foreclosure. Your Honor, the children are suffering." "The children have parents," the judge said dryly. "Miss Patterson is neither their parent nor their legal guardian. As for the financial straits, that seems to be the result of poor planning on your client's part. You can't build a household budget on the assumption that another adult will subsidize it indefinitely." Brian tried to speak out of turn, but his lawyer shut him down. Clara was crying, but I noticed she kept checking to make sure people were watching. Mom reached for Dad's hand, and for the first time, I saw them as they really were, enablers who'd created this monster and then fed me to it to keep it satisfied. The restraining orders were granted. No contact for 2 years, with the possibility of extension if violated. As the bailiff read the terms, I saw Brian's face cycle through emotions, anger, disbelief, and finally, what might have been genuine fear. Good. Maybe fear would teach him what family loyalty hadn't. I left through a different exit to avoid them, but I could hear the commotion as they were escorted out. Clara's voice, shrill and indignant. Brian's lower rumble of threats he couldn't follow through on. Mom's tears. The boys, I noticed, were silent. I hoped someone would look out for them. Despite everything, they were innocent in this mess. But I couldn't save them. I'd barely saved myself. That night, I sat on my balcony with Ferdinand purring in my lap and a glass of wine in my hand. The city lights twinkled below, full of possibility. My phone was quiet. My home was peaceful. My future was my own. I thought about the house I'd grown up in, probably in foreclosure proceedings by now. The rooms where I'd learned to read, where I'd hidden from Brian's teasing, where I'd dreamed of the life I'd someday build. It was strange to mourn a place that had become a prison. But I did. I mourned the family we could have been too. The one where success was celebrated, not exploited, where helping each other came from love, not obligation, where being responsible didn't mean being responsible for everyone else's choices. But that family had never existed. Maybe it never could have. My phone buzzed. A text from Melanie. Saw the news about the restraining orders. You okay? Better than okay. I typed back. Free. Dinner tomorrow. My treat. Your treat. I laughed. I can pay for myself now. I know. That's why I'm offering. I set the phone aside and breathed in the night air. Somewhere across town, my former family was probably huddled together, plotting their next move, or maybe finally facing reality. I'd probably never know which. And that was fine. I'd given them 2 years of my life. 2 years of sacrifice and servitude. Of being insulted over dinners I'd paid for and excluded from decisions about money I'd earned. 2 years of being told I was selfish for wanting basic respect. That I should be grateful for the privilege of subsidizing their lives. 2 years was enough. Ferdinand stretched, his claws kneading my leg through my jeans. I scratched behind his ears, and he purred louder. The sound mixing with the distant hum of traffic and the whisper of wind through the balcony plants I'd finally been able to buy. What do you think, buddy? I asked him. Did I do the right thing? He blinked slowly at me, a cat kiss. The shelter had called it and settled back down. As far as he was concerned, I was exactly where I needed to be. And for the first time in years, I agreed. The seasons changed. Spring faded into summer, bringing with it a promotion I'd actually earned and a raise I could actually keep. I traveled for the first time in 3 years a week in Portland for a conference that turned into a few extra days of solo exploration. I hiked mountains and ate at food trucks and remembered what it felt like to make choices based on want rather than obligation. My consulting business officially launched in the fall. Just a few clients at first, word-of-mouth referrals from colleagues who knew my work. But it grew steadily. And I incorporated before the year was out. Patterson Technical Solutions, LLC, my name on a business. My work, my reputation, my future. The restraining orders held. There were a few probing attempts, a distant relative reaching out with a sob story. An anonymous letter that was clearly Mom's handwriting, but nothing direct. I heard through the grapevine that they'd lost the house, that Brian and Clara had separated, that Dad's health had deteriorated. Each piece of news came with an implicit question. Didn't I feel guilty? I didn't. I felt sad sometimes for the waste of it all, for the years we'd all lost to dysfunction and enabling, for the boys especially, caught in the crossfire of their parents' poor choices. But guilt. No. You can't feel guilty for refusing to drown so others can use you as a life raft. A year after that final court date, I was having coffee with Melanie when she asked, "Do you ever think about reaching out? Maybe enough time has passed." I considered the question, rolling it around in my mind like a marble. I think about it sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep. I wonder if they've changed, if they understand now why I had to leave. And then I remember Clara telling me I had no future worth saving for. I remember Brian trying to sell my home out from under me. I remember throwing my things on the lawn like garbage. I remember 2 years of being told I was selfish for wanting to keep a single yogurt for myself. Melanie nodded slowly. Fair point. It's not about punishing them anymore, I continued. It's about protecting myself. Some relationships are too broken to fix, and that's okay. I had to learn that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about mutual respect and genuine care. They never offered me either. So you built your own family, she said, gesturing around the coffee shop where we were regulars, where the barista knew our orders and always asked about Ferdinand. I did. And it's a good one. That night, I got home to find Ferdinand had knocked over a plant, scattering dirt across the freshly vacuumed carpet. He sat in the middle of the mess, completely unrepentant, waiting for his dinner. "You're lucky you're cute," I told him, fetching the vacuum. He meowed in agreement. As I cleaned up my mess, in my home that I'd deal with on my own terms, I thought about responsibility. How I'd been taught that being responsible meant taking care of everyone else first. How that definition had nearly destroyed me. Now I knew better. Being responsible meant taking care of myself so I could choose to help others from a place of strength, not obligation. It meant setting boundaries and enforcing them. It meant recognizing when a situation was unsustainable and having the courage to leave. It meant throwing out the garbage, even when the garbage was family. The vacuum hummed as I worked, drowning out the city sounds. When I finished, Ferdinand was already in his favorite spot on the couch, waiting for me to join him for our evening routine. I grabbed my laptop, settled beside him, and opened my client files. 3 new inquiries this week. The business was growing faster than I'd projected. Soon I'd need to decide whether to hire help or stay solo, whether to lease office space or keep working from home, whether to expand into new markets or specialize further. Choices. All mine to make. I pulled up my financial spreadsheets, reviewing the numbers with satisfaction. The condo would be refinanced next year at a better rate. The emergency fund was fully funded. The business account was healthy and growing. For the first time in my adult life, I was building wealth instead of hemorrhaging it. My phone buzzed, a text from a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar. "Zoe, this is Mason. Mom gave me your number." I stared at the screen. Mason would be 10 now. Old enough to have his own phone. Apparently. Old enough to reach out on his own. "I know you're not supposed to talk to us, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for taking your yogurt all the time, and for messing up your office. Dad says you abandoned us, but I remember you were always nice even when we weren't. I hope Ferdinand is good." My throat tightened. I'd mentioned Ferdinand exactly once, in passing, when the boys had asked why I didn't have any pets. He'd remembered. I thought for a long time before responding. The restraining order technically included the boys, but this felt different. This felt like a kid trying to make sense of adult chaos. "Thank you for apologizing, Mason. That takes courage. Ferdinand is doing great. He's gotten fat from too many treats. I hope you're doing well in school." "I am. I got into advanced math. Mom says I got the smart genes from Dad's side, but I think it's from you. You were always working with numbers." I smiled despite myself. "Math is awesome. Keep working hard at it." "I will. Jaden says hi too. He's sorry about breaking your coffee mug that one time." "Tell him thank you." There was a pause. Then, "I should go. Mom doesn't know I have your number. But maybe when I'm older, we can talk again. When the court thing is over." "Maybe," I typed, meaning it. "Take care of yourself and your brother." "We will. Bye. Aunt Zoe." Aunt Zoe, not the ATM, not the responsible one, just Aunt Zoe. I set the phone aside and wiped my eyes. Maybe there was hope for the next generation after all. Maybe Mason and Jaden would learn from their parents' mistakes instead of repeating them. Maybe they'd understand that family was about more than taking whatever you could get. Or maybe not. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. Ferdinand crawled into my lap, purring his rattling purr. I stroked his fur and returned to my spreadsheets, planning a future that was entirely my own. The past was done. The bridges were burned. The price of freedom had been paid in full. And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, my home was warm and quiet and mine. No one would throw my belongings on the lawn here. No one would drain my accounts or steal my food or tell me I had no future worth planning for. I'd built this life one choice at a time, one boundary at a time, one hard decision at a time. It wasn't the life my family had wanted for me, the life of perpetual servitude disguised as duty. It was better. It was mine. The laptop screen glowed in the growing darkness as I worked. Ferdinand's purr a steady soundtrack. emails to answer, invoices to send, a life to live on my own terms. I thought about that day 3 years ago when I'd stood on that lawn, staring at my belongings scattered like secrets finally told, how it had felt like the end of everything, how it had actually been the beginning. They'd thrown me out, thinking they were punishing me for wanting more. Instead, they'd set me free. And I'd taken that freedom and built something they'd never understand, a life where paying your own way was a privilege, not a burden. Where being responsible meant taking care of yourself first. Where family was chosen, not endured. The irony still made me smile sometimes. They'd wanted my money, my labor, my life. They'd gotten none of it. And in trying to put me in my place, the basement, alone and grateful for even that, they'd accidentally shown me I didn't need a place in their house at all. I had my own place now, my own life, my own future. Despite Clara's sneering predictions, it wasn't fancy or impressive by their standards. I didn't have a spouse to mock or children to neglect. I just had peace, dignity, and the knowledge that everything I'd built was earned, not taken. The client emails could wait a few more minutes. I saved my work and closed the laptop, moving to the balcony despite the cooling evening air. The city spread below, lights beginning to twinkle on as the sun set. Somewhere out there, my former family was dealing with the consequences of their choices. But here, in my small kingdom of 1 bedroom and 1 cat and infinite possibility, I was home. "Hey, Ferdinand," I called. "Want some dinner?" He appeared immediately, winding around my ankles as we headed to the kitchen. I filled his bowl, refreshed his water, and started planning my own meal. Cooking for one had been an adjustment at first. Now it was just another small freedom: eat what I want, when I want, without judgment or complaint. My phone stayed quiet on the counter. No demands, no guilt trips, no crises that required my immediate financial attention. Just peaceful silence and the sound of Ferdinand crunching his kibble. This was what they'd never understood. I hadn't wanted luxury or excess. I just wanted the simple pleasure of living my own life without apologizing for it. The right to save for my future without being called selfish. The ability to buy yogurt and actually eat it myself. Such small things. But they'd rather lose everything than let me have even that. Their loss. My gain. I started pulling ingredients from the fridge, humming tunelessly as I cooked. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new clients, new decisions to make. But tonight, in my kitchen, in my home, with my cat and my quiet life, I had everything I needed, everything I'd paid for myself, everything they'd tried to take, everything I'd kept by walking away. The pasta water boiled. Ferdinand finished his dinner and commenced his evening bath. The city hummed its endless song outside my windows. And I stood in the middle of my small, perfect life, finally understanding what real wealth looked like. It looked like freedom. It looked like peace. It looked like a woman cooking dinner for one, with no one to answer to but herself. It looked like someone who'd learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about what you do to those who hurt you. It's about what you do for yourself once you're free.